Hey guys, as I mentioned in the weekly agenda, I typically spend the first week of a writing unit by asking students to read and discuss several models of the kind of essay that we'll be practicing. I try to choose models that demonstrate different writing strategies and different approaches to the writing task. That way, you see a range of possibilities for your own essay. So, for the next few days, I want to post a short video each day in which I talk about one or two of the model essays assigned for that day. I'll focus on a few key elements of writing a college application essay each day, and I'll use those models as examples, and I'll try to annotate them on the screen as I go. Okay. Before we get to the first model essay today, I want to take a few minutes just to talk about what this essay is all about. We should start by trying to understand what the purpose of a college application essay is. Okay, and what I mean by that, I don't mean getting you into college. That's your kind of that's the payoff of this if it works. But really, the main purpose is something else. And here's the thing: unlike an academic essay that you might write for class, the main purpose of a college application essay isn't to demonstrate what you know. And it's not even really to demonstrate how you write. At least that's not its main purpose. Now, college admissions advisors who read your essay or faculty that read your essay, they will undoubtedly be looking at the quality of your writing, but they're not English teachers and they're not reading it like a teacher or an English teacher. So they're not evaluating your grammar for its own sake. Instead, they will be looking to see how well your writing achieves the essay's purpose, which is to show them something about you that your transcripts, your resume, your letters of recommendation can't show. Okay. Admissions officers are going to get a lot of information or data about you, your grades, your test scores, your work or volunteer history, etc. But that stuff, that information doesn't really help them get to know the real you. Okay? Now, a 650 word essay can't give anyone a complete picture of the real you, but it can give someone a glimpse into you as a person or as a unique individual, how you think, how you respond to setbacks, how you see yourself, or how you look at the world. And that is what your target audience expects to get from your essay. Now, if the essay is poorly written, it's not going to convey that message clearly. So, although they don't evaluate your grammar or your writing style, your readers will notice if those things are lacking. Guys, the best writing is writing that nobody really notices because it does its job well. Okay? And its job is to convey an idea clearly. It's when the writing fails to communicate clearly that we tend to notice it. Okay, so don't take this as permission to write badly. Okay. Okay. A few other pieces of advice here before we move on. As I said before, the admissions officers are going to get your resume. They're going to get your transcripts, your test scores. So you don't want to use this essay to kind of repeat those things or to list your academic achievements or your work history. Okay, those academic achievements will come through in your transcripts. They'll come through in your letters of recommendation. Okay. Now, if let's say if you've had some kind of work experience or volunteer experience that was really impactful for you, then maybe you could use that or mine that experience for your essay, but it would have to be really focused. Okay, and we'll see some examples of that and talk about that as we get into some of the model essays. You also don't want to use this essay to try to kind of sell yourself by just listing all of your best traits or what you think your best traits are, right? A lot of students go into this thinking that, oh, these colleges, they want to know that I'm hardworking. They want to know that I'm a team player. They want to know that I'm really smart. So I gotta speak to those qualities. Again, your experience, your resume, and your transcripts will speak to a lot of those things. So you don't want to just try to boast in this. Now, the flip side of this, you don't want to focus on the negative, right? And I think the first reading that I had for you today explains this a little bit better. Colleges don't want people who are just depressed or really negative, or blame others for their mistakes. So you don't want to focus on the negative either. We'll talk more about that later on. Okay. I've mentioned that a college application essay is a type of personal narrative essay. So what is a personal narrative essay? Let's break that term down for a moment. Okay. The first word is personal. So what does that mean? Well, obviously it's personal because it's about you. Right? It's not about some historical event or literary text. It doesn't argue for or against some policy. The topic is you. Because it's written about you, it's written in the first person. You can't really write this kind of essay and not use the first person pronoun. That would just be really weird. It's also personal in the sense that it relies on details of your own experiences to help communicate its message. Almost every kind of writing that we do for other people requires us to use detailed examples of what we're talking about. And this essay is no different. We'll dive deeper into the use of details later on. One thing personal doesn't mean, though, is private. So you don't want to write anything that you're not comfortable letting other people read. Okay, narrative. What does narrative imply? Well, another word for narrative is story. And a personal narrative uses stories from your own life to illustrate whatever it is you're trying to tell your readers about yourself. Okay? And an important element of story is conflict. Often, not always, but often, personal narratives explore a conflict in the writer's life. Usually, it's an internal conflict. Okay. And we'll get more into that in just a bit. But that's an important thing to keep in mind. Okay, often students, I think, write about, let's say, an external challenge like the big game, right, or something like that, or maybe some kind of disagreement or conflict they had with another person. Those are external conflicts, but typically the best personal narrative essays that you explore a conflict will focus on a conflict within the writer's own their own mind or their own heart. Okay. Now, the last word in this phrase is essay, personal narrative essay. So what makes a personal narrative essay an essay? Right? There are a lot of differences between a narrative essay and an academic essay. And I mean, an academic essay being like an essay you'd write for a class. Okay. But there are some key similarities. And one of those similarities is that they both have a thesis. Now, that doesn't mean that they both have a thesis statement. It means that they both try to make a point about something. Okay? And that's actually a better word, I think, than thesis for talking about this kind of essay. So I'm going to shift to using point now instead of thesis. But they're essentially the same basic thing. Now, personal narrative essay is an essay also because it makes it's an essay because it makes a point. It doesn't just tell a story or several stories. Okay, then it would just be a narrative. It uses those stories to make a point. It says, here's something that happened to me, and this is what it taught me, or this is how it shaped me into the person I am today. In other words, here's why this story matters. One other thing that a personal narrative essay has in common with an academic essay is that both kinds of essays use evidence. Let's say you're writing an essay about Frankenstein or 1984, you're going to use quotations or other kinds of examples from the book to support the point that you're trying to make about it, right? If you're writing a research paper for some other class, you're going to use evidence from your sources to support the point that you're trying to make. In a personal narrative essay, you also need evidence to support your point, but that evidence comes in the form of stories or moments from your life. It doesn't come from other sources. It comes from you. And in fact, most personal narrative essays start by telling stories. And we see that in the models that you read for today. We'll look closer at that in just a sec. But they begin by telling stories, and then they reflect on why that episode matters. So again, it's here's what happened to me, and here's what I learned. It's not, here's what I learned, right? And here's the evidence to support that. Okay, so it kind of goes in that order there. Okay, so to sum up, we can think of a personal narrative essay like this, or define it like this. A personal narrative essay tells a story or stories about the writer's life, and it uses those stories to make a point about the writer. Okay, let's take a look at one of our model essays for today. Okay. And we'll see how this demonstrates some of the things that we just discussed. So we're going to look together at a wider lens by Jillian. First name only, her last name was left off on the website. So let's start with the essay's point. If a personal narrative essay makes a point, okay, or again, thesis, right? What is Jillian's point in a wider lens? In other words, what's the thesis of this essay? What is Jillian trying to show the admissions committee about herself? Now, the point of a personal narrative is sometimes a lesson the writer learns from an experience, right? A realization or an epiphany that the writer has. Now, when I read Jillian's essay, I find a couple of points where she seems to mention a realization like this. And one is in paragraph 3. It's kind of at the end of paragraph 3. She says, "It was not until last summer when I received a government scholarship to study Hindi in India that my perspective regarding Jillian's world was altered by one unlikely symbol, the swastika." Okay. So, I'm wondering as I read, is this the point, right? We'll see in just a sec whether or not this is the case. Because the other moment where I see a kind of realization, something that might be the point, is here at the end of paragraph 5. She says, "It was then that I realized that I needed to take another look at the swastika through my host family's lens." Sorry, typing and reading at the same time does not really work for me. So she uses the word realized here. So is this the point, right? Could this be the point, or at least part of the point? Well, I don't. What do you guys think? Do you think that this is either of these are the main point, the main thing that she is trying to tell the admissions officers about herself? I'd say no. These sentences aren't telling us how her perspective changed. Okay, they're just, all they're really doing is helping the essay move forward by transitioning to the next part of the story. Okay, like right here, my perspective was altered by one unlikely symbol, and then here she tells the story of how she encountered that symbol, and then she says here, I realized I needed to take another look at that symbol through my host family's lens, and that's what she does here. She goes on to talk about the story of how her perspective was changed on that. I'd say the real epiphany or understanding that Jillian has comes at the very end of the essay, the very, very end of the essay, last part of the first paragraph. Yeah. So she describes her conversation with her host mother about the swastika, or the swastika in Hindi, and she gives us these great details too about the host mother's confusion and her disbelief. She says, "With wide eyes and a furrowed brow, she answered." And by the way, what is she trying to show us about the mother here? The wide eyes and a furrowed brow? That she's confused, right? Or surprised or shocked. But she never uses those words. She doesn't use the adjectives. Confused, shocked, things like that. She shows us. We'll talk more about that later on when we look at detail more carefully, but this is a great thing to do. Show us rather than just tell us what the person was thinking. Okay. So she goes into this conversation, and I'd say that the host mother's confusion here kind of mirrors Jillian's own confusion. Okay, so both of them are confused because there's this symbol, and they both have these different associations with it, which is part of the point too. And she's using this conversation to kind of set up her main point, which comes right here. Okay, this is where it begins. "We sat across from each other, both amazed at how our views of one symbol could oppose one another, yet be equally valid in their own respect. This was the beauty of perspective. Okay, so when she says this was the beauty of perspective, right there, that conveys understanding, that conveys realization. It's the epiphany. Okay, this is what she's come to learn, or at least part of it. Right? But Gillian doesn't stop here. This isn't the end of the essay. There's still a couple of sentences. And this makes the essay more effective, I think. Guys, I've read a lot of guidebooks. I've read a lot of websites that offer advice on writing college essays. And a lot of them say that writing about how a trip to a foreign country, like a missions trip, has helped you appreciate other cultures is kind of a cliche. And I'd say that's probably true. I mean, I'm not an admissions officer myself, but I've assigned this essay for many years, and I've gotten a lot of those kinds of essays. And this is a sense right here in this sentence. This is kind of what Gillian is saying here. Okay, that her trip to India has kind of widened her perspective. Okay, it's given her, it's opened her mind a little bit. Okay. But she doesn't stop there. That's not the end of her point, because then she goes on. She goes on here to bring the essay back to her own insecurities that she had mentioned early on. She says, since returning from India, I now push my hair away from my face with headbands, and my fear of sustained eye contact has vanished. My disability does not limit Gillian's world, but rather gives me the ability to see far and wide. Okay. So the essay is really about, it's not just about how her trip to India gave her more of an open mind. It's actually about how she's come to see herself. It's about her growth from being insecure about her perspective, or I'm sorry, about her difference, to accepting and embracing it. Okay, let me just write this down here. So, embraces her difference, doesn't feel insecure about it. Okay. Here's the thing. Why do you think this kind of lesson might matter to an admissions committee, right? Think about it, your reader is reading this, and they're trying not to just get a sense of who you are, but they're also trying to see if they would be a good fit for their college or for college in general, right? Well, essentially what she's conveying here are two really important characteristics for a college student. One is that they're open-minded, okay? Because in college, you're going to encounter a lot of people with different ideas, or from different places. So she has the ability to kind of look through the world through other people's points of view, but she also is kind of self-confident, right? Not overly self-confident, but she has kind of come to accept who she is. Okay, and that's a really kind of grown-up thing to be able to do. And so a committee is going to look at this and they're going to go, wow, this is a really thoughtful person. This is a person who's really can dig deep into themselves and be honest with themselves. And they're also probably going to be a good member of this community. Okay? Now, here's one other thing too before we move on. Notice that she never explicitly says, I am now I'm now more comfortable with myself, or now I have an open mind now, right? She doesn't say, in the end, I learned from my experience that a disability does not limit a person, blah, 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 right? It's more subtle than that and more effective than that, because she keeps her point personal. She keeps the point about herself, right? I now push my hair away. My fear of sustained eye contact has vanished. My disability doesn't limit Gillian's world, but gives me the ability to see far and wide. Okay, so she doesn't say disability in general gives somebody, I learned that people shouldn't people shouldn't be ashamed of blah, blah, blah. No, it's about herself, okay? Not about a big topic like cultural difference or disability in general. It's about her. So that's what you want to do. You want to keep your point focused on yourself, okay? What you learned, how you grew, how you changed, how that experience impacted you specifically. Also, the point of Jillian's essay comes at the very end, okay, of the essay. It's not at the beginning. Okay? It's not a thesis statement at the end of the introduction. It's all the way at the very end of the essay. And that's because, I'll write this down here real quick. The point is at the end. That's because what's driving this essay is the story of Jillian's growth, of who she was before, okay, which we get up here, felt ashamed, right, of who she was before, and she was confused about the swastika, and couldn't really understand because she was only looking through her own cultural lens, to who she is now, right? Now she is able to kind of see that other cultures have different perspectives, and she also has changed her own perspective on herself. So it's a story of growth, right? From one way of thinking to a new way of thinking. And if she had put this point at the beginning and said, now I understand this, it wouldn't have the same effect because we wouldn't have the context to make sense of that understanding. We need the story of how she was before to how she is now to really understand that transformation in the way that she thinks. Okay, so one of the things I mentioned earlier too is that these essays often, but not always, explore a conflict in the writer's life, usually an internal conflict in the writer's life. Did you notice a conflict in this essay? Most students who read this, they notice at least one. Many also point out that there are maybe two conflicts going on at the same time. If we look at the point of the essay, that actually is a clue to understanding the conflict. Okay. Right here, she says, since returning to India, I now push my hair away from my face with headbands, and my fear of sustained eye contact has vanished. So that fear of sustained eye contact, the way that she had, covered her face with headbands, this suggests the conflict in the essay. Okay. So the main conflict here in this essay, I think, is Jillian's insecurities about herself. Okay? And the essay really tries to show how that conflict gets resolved. Okay? And I don't know, let me see if I can make this real quick. You guys remember what this isn't very good. This symbol here, now you know what it is, right? A plot diagram. Okay, we've got the exposition, and we've got this turning point here where the conflict gets introduced, and the conflict really takes place, over the bulk of the story. As the action rises, and then we come here to the climax, and then things get resolved, right? Climax gets resolved. Well, or the conflict gets resolved. Well, that's kind of what happens in a lot of these essays. Okay, an essay explores a conflict, and then at the end, that conflict gets resolved in the writer's understanding or the writer's growth. Okay, and that's really what happens here. Jillian grows. She grows from being one, having a limited perspective and being insecure to having a broader perspective and being less insecure. Okay, so she's kind of overcome those difficulties, and is now, her conflict now is resolved, and here's where we get the point. Okay, we'll talk about that in a little bit more later on when we talk about structure of the essays. Okay. And the first time that she mentions this conflict, I just want to point out, would be up here. I highlighted it before. For the majority of my childhood, I felt ashamed by my prosthetic eye. Okay. So she opens this essay then with a story about her art teacher's lesson right here, which leads her to the next story, okay, right here, about her retinoblastoma, okay, her disability. And then this, of course, prompts her to introduce the conflict. Okay, that disability was the cause of this shame that she felt, and this insecurity that she felt. Yeah. The other conflict that people sometimes point out here is what it takes place when she goes to India and she confronts the swastika. Okay, so right in here, I encountered it. Here, I'd seen it before. My heart started to sting as images of skeletal bodies and families torn apart raced through my head. Okay, so this is an really uncomfortable moment for her, and that right there is a kind of conflict. Okay, so here I'd say this is also a kind of internal conflict. She hates this symbol for what she associates it with, but at the same time, she right here. She likes her host family, and she says that they are the antithesis of what this symbol stands for in her mind, right? So how right now the conflict? How does she reconcile this? Right, here's the symbol that I loathe, but yet the family who has this symbol here is so great. They're awesome. They're nothing like what I associate with this. It's a really confusing moment there. So I say that's a kind of conflict, right? Now the conversation, of course, that unfolds here is the actual story of how that conflict gets resolved. Okay, and this leads us to the understanding that she then has. And so here she's able to kind of reconcile those two conflicting interpretations of the swastika now. Okay? So the point that Jillian makes through this essay, that she has a new perspective on herself, just like she got a new perspective on the swastika, actually resolves those two conflicts. Okay? And this brings me to the last thing today. If you write about an experience that taught you something about yourself, or about a time where you experienced growth, you'll need to have an internal conflict, because, guys, that's how we grow. Okay, and let me just put that up here real quick in writing. That is how we grow. Okay, that's how we change. Okay, conflict leads to growth. Okay, let's make that internal. Conflict leads to growth. Okay, maturity. All right, think about it this way. Here's an analogy. When we work out, when we exercise, we put our bodies through physical challenges, and those challenges help us get stronger, physically stronger, and sometimes mentally stronger, right? Well, mental challenges or emotional challenges help us grow too, and that's what these internal conflicts are, right? They make us wiser. They make us more, maybe more emotionally intelligent. They make us understand ourselves better. Okay, and that's what we mean by growth. So it's conflict that leads to growth.